That day, we were having a barbecue in the yard with our daughter and her husband. Under the warm sunlight, the smell of grilled meat filled the air.
Oh, we're running low on beer. Camilla, can you grab some from the shed and put it in the fridge?
My husband, Stephen, said to me.
Got it. 4 or 5 bottles, okay?
Hey, Adam, can you help Mom too? Make sure to chill whatever's left.
Our daughter, Sandra, asked her husband, Adam. Adam smiled and said,
Well, of course.
And followed me to the shed behind the yard. The shed is relatively new, and now it only has a few boxes of beer stacked inside. As I opened the door and tried to lift one of the boxes from the dim corner, Adam suddenly pushed on my back, trying to force me to sit on the ground. Instinctively, I turned my head to look at his face. Seeing the desperate expression on his face, something I wasn't used to, I instantly felt a fear that he might attack me.
Hey! What are you doing?
I tried to yell out in surprise, but he whispered with looking a bit flustered.
I'm sorry. Just bear with me for a moment.
What?
There's something I absolutely need to check.
With his usual warm smile gone at that moment, Adam was staring at me with an unusually serious look. Soon after, I would witness something unbelievable with him. My name is Camilla. It was the beginning of spring, with perfect weather. After a brief illness, my husband, Frank, passed away. Since then, our daughter Sandra and I lived a modest and quiet life. For several years, it was just the two of us, mother and daughter, until I was introduced to Stephen through a mutual friend. Stephen was the same age as Frank and even bore a slight resemblance to him. At first, we were just good friends, but over time, I began to see him differently. However, whenever I found myself walking next to Stephen and laughing, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt.
You don't have to rush. I'll wait as long as it takes.
He would say, smiling gently as he walked a little ahead of me. I was drawn to his kindness, but at the same time, I struggled with letting go of Frank. It was the 7th anniversary of Frank's passing. After meeting with his family for the first time in years, I handed over the responsibility of caring for his grave and altar. His sister, Megan, gently placed a hand on my shoulder, not making eye contact, but smiled warmly and said,
Thank you for everything.
I smiled, hiding the tears that welled up, thinking that this might be the last time I visited Frank's grave. A few months later, I decided to marry Stephen in the end. We moved into a new house, and I got rid of all my old clothes and furniture, starting fresh. I felt that keeping any of Frank's things around would only hurt Stephen. At first, my daughter Sandra a bit unsure about the whole thing, but slowly she grew closer to Stephen. They had spent time together even before the remarriage as friends, so it didn't take long for her to get used to him. Sandra had just turned 15. She was at a sensitive age, started wearing a bit more makeup and going out, and before long, she was sweet-talking Stephen for spending money. Our life as a mother and daughter had never been particularly affluent, and I couldn't always buy her the things she wanted. Unlike me, who was strict about money, Stephen was lenient with her. Without asking too many questions, he would pull out his wallet and hand her cash whenever she mentioned going out with friends. When I later scolded Stephen about this, he would look troubled and say,
Sorry. I just feel like money is the only way I can get close to Sandra right now.
He would continue to treat Sandra with special care, not just with money, but in small ways, almost like she was a princess. It made me happy to see him try so hard to love both Sandra and me. I was happy that Stephen was doing his best to care for both of us. I had the only thing reminding me of Frank, which was our wedding ring, and I tucked away in the back of my closet. I sometimes would take it out and look at it without really thinking. However, something about it didn't feel right, so I sent it to Frank's parents with a simple letter.
I'm sorry, Frank, but I want to move forward with my life.
Am I allowed to be happy? I do not know. I don't know, but deep down, I truly want to be happy. Over time, Sandra grew closer and closer to Stephen, so much so that she was always by his side. It made me happy, of course, but there was something that slightly bothered me.
Hey, Dad, I really want this new bag, but I'm a little short on cash. What should I do?
Oh, what kind of bag is it?
Stephen eagerly looked at the phone screen Sandra held out. On the screen, I caught a glimpse of a well-known designer bag. Even I recognized it. As Sandra scrolled through the price, Stephen rubbed the back of his head, looking a bit troubled.
Wow, it's pretty expensive. But well, all right. Anything for you, Sandra?
Really? Yay! Thanks, Dad.
Sandra hugged Stephen tightly, and he grinned, clearly pleased with himself. Since we got married, I started to notice Sandra's sense of money was changing. Maybe it was the effect of our previously modest life, but she came to ask Stephen for everything, knowing he'd buy it with a smile.
Sandra, don't waste so much money.
It's fine. I'm not asking you, Mom. Right, Dad?
Sandra and Stephen exchanged glances and laughed together.
One day, I'm gonna marry someone as handsome and kind as you, Dad.
Stephen's grin grew even wider as his face crinkled with pride. After securing that promise, Sandra returned to her room to study. She had been serious about her studies, aiming to attend nursing school after graduating high school. At home, we kept things quiet for her, leaving the TV off and only playing a small radio in the kitchen. Our life was incredibly happy. I would say we were happy enough so that I could almost forget that my first husband had passed away. Even so, sometimes, when a song from my younger days came on the radio, I'd remember. The melody, the lyrics, they'd squeeze my heart and bring me to the verge of tears.
Hey, don't look so sad. It's just one bag, you know?
Stephen said, missing the point entirely, which made me smile despite myself. I took a deep breath and reminded him we shouldn't just hand Sandra money whenever she asked. In fact, since Stephen had started his own business when he was young, he was able to count some of these expenses as business costs. It wasn't exactly a commendable practice, and I worried it might affect the business, but even after I urged him to stop, he didn't listen.
Honey, you're too soft on her.
Our days continued like that. Sandra successfully entered nursing school, and after graduation, she moved out and started living on her own. Working hard as a nurse, she was doing well. By the time she turned 25, she had started dating a man her age named Adam, and they decided to get married. When Adam was first introduced to us at home, I tried not to show it, but I was surprised. Sandra had always declared,
I'm going to marry a handsome guy.
Yet Adam, though a pleasant young man, wasn't exactly what you'd call classically handsome. He had a kind smile and a soft demeanor, and I'd heard he came from a wealthy family, judging by his well-kept appearance. Even after the wedding, Sandra and Adam visited often. Adam was always kind to Stephen and me. I felt truly relieved, knowing my daughter had married a good man. One day, Stephen suggested we have a barbecue in our yard. The weather was perfect, with a clear blue sky and a few birds singing overhead. Stephen had been up since early morning, eagerly preparing and grilling the meat like a pro, chatting happily with Sandra. On the other hand, Adam was scanning the sky, trying to spot the birds, but eventually gave up and poured himself a drink.
Oh, we're running low on beer. Camilla, can you grab some from the shed and put it in the fridge?
Sure. 4 or 5 bottles, okay?
Hey, Adam, why don't you help Mom? Just chill all the beer we've got.
Adam smiled and said,
Of course.
and followed me to the shed behind the yard. The shed was relatively new, with only a few boxes of beer stacked inside for storage. As I opened the door and tried to lift one of the boxes from the dim corner, Adam, who was behind me, suddenly pushed on my back, trying to force me to sit down on the ground.
Hey! What are you doing?
I was so startled that I almost shouted, but he whispered with looking a little panicked.
I'm sorry. Just bear with me for a moment, please.
What?
There's something I really need to confirm.
Before I could even ask what he needed to confirm, he peeked out of the dimly lit shed, checking the outside. The weather was perfect, and the bright green lawn reflected the sunlight. From where we were inside the shed, Stephen and Sandra couldn't see us. After watching them from a distance for a while, I saw Sandra move closer, leaning against Stephen's arm. She rubbed her face against Stephen's upper arm, laughing happily. I could faintly hear their voices. Yet, the singing of the birds echoed inside the shed, making it hard to hear them clearly. Adam stared at them intently with a serious expression. At first, I wondered he was jealous of how close Sandra and Stephen were. The thought made me laugh. Adam then noticed that and pointed at them, saying,
Look,
Sandra glanced around and then wrapped her arm around Stephen's. Stephen looked a bit flustered at first, glanced around, and accepted her affection with smiling eventually. Their interaction seemed, I should say, more than just father and daughter. The birds' singing faded. With no wind or other sounds, Sandra and Stephen's voices became clearer, even from a distance.
You know what? Adam hasn't noticed anything. It's kind of funny, isn't it?
Well, Camilla hasn't either. It's not something you'd normally imagine.
Isn't this kind of relationship exciting and fun?
I stood there, dumbfounded, listening to their conversation. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. Then, I saw Sandra take out a small clear bag with some powdered substance and stir it into the glasses Adam and I had been drinking from.
Did she just put something in our drinks?
that's probably a sleeping pill. She's been secretly visiting a psychiatrist recently without me knowing.
Sleeping pills? A psychiatrist? I didn't understand any of it, but the fact that she'd put something in our drinks was enough to make my head spin.
We should leave before they notice something's up, but don't drink from that glass.
After that, Adam and I pretended like nothing happened as we returned to Stephen and Sandra. Sandra kept glancing at my glass, her behavior slightly off. The mere fact that she was trying to make me take some strange drug was a huge shock to me, and I felt dizzy, as if I had been betrayed by the daughter I had raised all these years.
I'm sorry. I think I got a little too much sun. I'm going to lie down for a bit inside.
Oh, sure. I'll take care of the cleanup. Just rest.
Lying on the bed, I stared blankly at the ceiling. Why would Sandra put a sleeping pill in my drink? Furthermore, why was the dynamic between Stephen and Sandra so strange? As these thoughts spiraled, I felt a headache growing from the conflicting thoughts.
Maybe. No way, that couldn't be.
I must have fallen asleep after lying down for a while. By the time I woke up, it was late in the afternoon, and the cleanup outside was already done. Sandra and Adam seemed to be on their way out. When Adam saw me, he had a look on his face like he wanted to say something, but then his eyes shifted and he stayed silent.
Are you feeling better?
After they left, Stephen acted as if everything was normal, asking about my well-being. His words, his voice, everything sounded like a lie to me, and I forced a strained smile.
You still look a little off. Want me to make dinner?
He rolled up his sleeves and started rummaging through the fridge. I remembered that we had some meat left over from the previous day, but then the image of him slipping something into my drink flashed in my mind. I quickly moved toward him, pushing him aside.
I'll cook,
I said, hastily preparing a simple meal. There's no way I could eat anything he cooked at that time. For several days since then, I hesitated to touch any of the food or bottled water in the house. What if Stephen had already drugged them? Once I started thinking that way, I couldn't help but wonder if there might be hidden cameras or listening devices, and life at home started to feel unbearable. Then, one day, I received a message from Adam. It seemed that he had talked to his parents about the suspicion that Sandra had put sleeping pills in our drinks. His parents were concerned for my safety and offered me a place to stay temporarily.
I honestly don't think I can stay here with Steven right now without losing my mind. That's such a kind offer.
It's one of our relatives' vacation homes. It's not being used, so you can stay as long as you need. And also, I'd like to have a talk with my parents, with you present if possible.
Adam's voice over the phone was heavy with emotion. Of course it was. He might be suspecting that his wife was cheating on him with another man. Moreover, that man was, I didn't even want to think about it. A few days later, I lied to Steven, telling him,
A friend invited me to a trip in nature.
I had already mentioned to him that I'd been having headaches ever since the barbecue, so I used that as an excuse, saying my friend thought I should get some rest.
A trip in nature, huh? Sounds nice. Take your time and relax. Maybe I'll invite Sandra over for dinner while you're gone.
The ease with which he said that, without any guilt or hesitation, made my skin crawl. Later, I headed to a meeting point Adam had given me. Adam picked me up, and we drove to the vacation home.
I'm sorry for making you travel so far.
He apologized to me with a genuinely remorseful expression. Not only he'd gone out of his way to arrange a place to hide me, but also he expressed his sincere. I felt something stir within me at his kindness. The area seemed to be a neighborhood of vacation homes, with clean, seemingly uninhabited houses scattered here and there. Surrounded by many trees, the vacation home stood quietly. At the front door, Adam's parents were waiting for me. It was only the third time I'd met them, once during the formal marriage meeting, again at the wedding, and this visiting. I had heard from Sandra that they were quite wealthy, which made me feel a bit intimidated, but I was grateful that they had offered me a place to stay.
Thank you so much.
We're sorry to rush this, but let's go inside and discuss things further.
As soon as we entered the vacation home, Adam, his parents, and I sat down to talk. Adam had already told them about Sandra putting sleeping pills in our drinks. He also mentioned that Sandra's spending habits had become strangely excessive, far surpassing his own salary. As her mother, hearing that was a bit painful.
We're also unclear where Sandra is getting all this money from, so we'd like to get to the bottom of that. My parents are willing to propose a donation to Steven's business as a way to let things play out for a while. What do you think?
Let things play out, that phrase stuck with me. What could we possibly discover by doing that? What kind of outcome awaits at the end of what I'm about to do? Sensing my hesitation, Adam looked me in the eyes and smiled softly when I met his gaze.
This might all just be us overthinking things. Let's try to be a little sneaky so we can all feel safe and live peacefully again, okay?
His words made me laugh a little despite the situation. Overthinking? No, we weren't wrong. We were simply trying to confirm what we already knew deep down. After a few days at the vacation home, I started to feel more at ease. Though, I also felt guilty about staying there too long, so I decided it was time to return home. A few weeks later, Adam's parents formally offered a donation to Steven's business. Given their wealth, the proposal was quickly accepted, and Steven and Sandra were delighted, not even questioning the specifics of the donation. While they celebrated, I quietly watched from the sidelines. Back at home, being inside started to feel suffocating, so I took up walking as part of my daily routine. There's a field of wheat right in front of our house, and the green stalks stretch out as far as the eye can see. As I walked along the quiet, asphalt-paved road, I looked up at the distant birds flying overhead. Since the offer of the donation, Steven and Sandra had been living a life of extravagance. Steven convinced he had secured the funds, and went ahead and bought a luxury car under the guise of it being a company vehicle. As for Sandra, she continued to splurge on things like spa treatments and manicures. Even though they were running out of savings, Steven was counting on the money to come through eventually. His naive optimism was obvious. One day, both families gathered for a meal to discuss the financial arrangements. It was us, Sandra and Adam's parents, all meeting at our home. Steven was fawning, flashing a sycophantic smile at Adam's parents.
I really can't thank Adam enough. Sandra is always saying how happy she is to have married such a wonderful man.
Stephen was still fawning over them, but they weren't smiling back. Instead, they quietly placed some papers on the table. Thinking it was the donation paperwork, Stephen eagerly said.
Thank you.
But as he read the contents, his face turned pale.
When we started looking into your company to finalize the donation, we uncovered some pretty serious facts.
His face got drenched in sweat as he read through the documents. There were two main points. There was evidence that Stephen and Sandra had been involved in a romantic relationship, as well as a tax investigation into expenses that had been falsely reported as company costs. The proof that my own daughter had been involved with my husband made me want to cover my face in shame. All the money Sandra had spent on luxury goods and spa treatments was disguised as company expenses. Consequently, there were additional taxes to pay.
We can't possibly move forward with the donation under these circumstances.
Wait, you can't be serious.
Stephen, who was in full panic mode, spilled the water in front of him. Sandra looked visibly shaking and rushed to clean it up with trembling hands.
Sandra, I'm filing for divorce and I'll be demanding compensation.
What? Compensation? For what?
You cheated on me. That's what, and Camilla is.
With those words, Adam looked over at me. Stephen, who had been staring at the documents, shifted his gaze toward me. His eyes filled with fear, continuing to stare at me.
I'm divorcing Stephen too, and I'll also be asking for compensation.
You've got to be kidding. This can't be happening.
Stephen's voice cracked as he shook violently, dropping the papers to the floor. Sandra edged closer to Stephen with terrified herself, pointing a trembling finger at Adam.
No! You've got it wrong. It was him, Adam. He was the one having the affair with his own mother-in-law.
Even at the very end, Sandra screamed out absurd accusations, trying to shift the blame and make wild excuses. With the solid evidence in front of us, neither Stephen nor Sandra could weasel their way out. Eventually, Stephen slumped his shoulders in defeat and began to speak quietly. He admitted to getting involved with Sandra, but he had long realized there was no love in it. He said he initially resisted Sandra's advances, knowing she only cared about money. Nonetheless, as she blossomed into a beautiful woman while I aged, Stephen eventually made his choice.
I'm a man after all. And we're not even blood related. I couldn't resist.
Stephen revealed that it was Sandra's idea to spike our drinks with sleeping pills during the barbecue. The plan was to undress Adam and me, put us in bed together, take photos, and use them to demand compensation. The sheer stupidity of it all made me feel nothing but cold contempt as I watched the two of them.
I'm so sorry. Please forgive me.
I'm sorry too. I don't want to lose Adam.
I didn't say a word, I just stared at them. I couldn't find the words. How could I ever forgive them? How could anyone forgive something like this? As I remained silent, Sandra eventually lost her patience and yanked Stephen's sleeve.
This is all your fault. How are we supposed to pay the credit card bills next week? What are you going to do about it?
What? Why are you even shopping without telling me? I'm already using a card loan to cover my losses from the casino. What the hell are we supposed to do?
That was the true definition of a complete meltdown. Sandra started pulling Stephen's hair and clothes, lashing out violently, while Stephen yelled back, desperately trying to stop her. Their shouting voices surely must have reached the neighbors at that moment. If word got out that a father and daughter, even if only in-law, were involved with each other, no one in their right mind would want to live in this neighborhood. Naturally, that would be true for me as well. I felt a bit sad at the thought that I probably wouldn't be seeing the familiar scenery outside the window anymore. After that, Sandra and Adam divorced and moved far away. Sandra sank into the nightlife, unable to get her life together, drowning in alcohol and piling up debt. Stephen paid a hefty compensation but was eventually chased by creditors, and his company went bankrupt. He disappeared, almost like a fugitive, and is now homeless, hiding somewhere. Adam, on the other hand, learned from his failed marriage and eventually found a good match. I received compensation from Stephen as well. I'm not sure how he managed to scrape together such a large sum, given that his company went under and he was being pursued by debt collectors, but at the very end, he showed some sense of responsibility. After divorcing Stephen and selling the house, I decided to move back to my parents' home. On the flight back, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had lost my first husband to illness, remarried, divorced again, and was even betrayed by my own daughter. What kind of face am I supposed to show my parents now? There are vast wheat fields surrounding my childhood home. I walked down the long asphalt road, dragging my large suitcase behind me. The weather was warm. The season was turning toward early summer. When I finally arrived home, my parents welcomed me without asking any questions. I didn't know why they didn't ask anything. I wondered if they were pitying me, but it didn't feel like that. They just accepted me, naturally. As I gazed out at the peaceful countryside, I realized it was time to take a good look at my life moving forward. Thanks to my father's connections, I got a job at the local agricultural cooperative and started rebuilding my life. Since then, I've kept in touch with Adam's parents. We don't see each other often, but whenever they're nearby, we meet for the occasional meal.
Wait. What's this?
It was a spring day, several years after I had moved back home. It was a sudden and unexpected event. I found the wedding ring that my late husband Frank had given me sitting on the table. Feeling a little shaken, I picked it up and looked at it in the palm of my hand. As I stood there and kept stunned, my mother, with her bent back, came in from the kitchen and began wiping the table.
Quite some time ago, his parents came by and said they wanted you to have it after all.
I stood there speechless. Outside the window, the wheat fields stretched out. Beyond the clear blue sky, the birds kept singing, as if to declare, I'm still here. Tears welled up in my eyes, and with my bag slung over my shoulder, I jumped on my bike and started pedaling. I rode through the empty wheat fields, sweat beading on my forehead as I pressed forward. What should I do from here? I don't know, but I'll keep moving forward. I'll save my complaints for the very end, after I've lived life to the fullest.